Hi everyone, Al the Psych here. Today I'm going to do a video for information purposes only on self-forgiveness. Okay, so sources that I used include, but are not limited to, Orientation to the Psychology of Self-Forgiveness, The Healthy Way to Forgive Yourself, How to Forgive Yourself, that was through WebMD, and then my perspective, of course. I always throw in my perspective, so that's why you want to do your own due diligence, because sometimes my perspective can be different than what research says. Okay, so the earliest psychological definition of self-forgiveness was proposed by Enright and the Human Development Study Group in 1996, and they describe self-forgiveness as a willingness to abandon self-resentment in the face of one's acknowledged objective wrong while fostering compassion, generosity, and love toward oneself. Enright et al. Drew from philosophy of forgiving others, paralleling the processes by beginning with resentment experienced by victims toward perpetrators of offense. So resentment implies holding one culpable for what has occurred and desiring to exact revenge or punishment. So when perpetrators accept forgiveness from one who was wronged, the perpetrator is released from others' resentment on behalf of a victim's altruistic decision to forgive. Okay, so self-forgiveness, according to Enright et al., is releasing the resentment one feels toward oneself for one's own actions. Okay. So, if you've wronged somebody, you may feel guilt, feeling bad about your behavior and what damage your behavior may have caused. Now, this is different than shame, which is more of a negative feeling about yourself. Okay, so guilt would be I did a bad thing. Shame would be I'm a bad person. Okay, so there's a real big difference between guilt and shame. Guilt, regarding the behavior, shame regarding, your sense of self. So in my mind, some degree of guilt could actually be a good thing. It tells me that I'm not a sociopath. It tells me I'm not someone that couldn't care less about the impact that my behavior might have upon other people. On the other hand, I don't want to carry this guilt forever. Okay, I don't want to beat myself up psychologically. That's not healthy. So that's what this video is about. So if I'm feeling guilt, then it sounds like I've acknowledged some responsibility for what I did. I would look back at the incident, acknowledge my share of involvement in the situation. I kind of look at this as like a shared responsibility scenario. And you can peel this onion, quite a bit. A lot of layers to it, I'm sure, depending on the scenario. So, for example, how old were you when the incident took place? I mean, I can still look back on situations when I was, a very young man and not sophisticated enough to handle social situations like I could at my advanced age now. Did I have the interpersonal tools to deal with the situation in a better way? So now I'm not looking for excuses here, but I'm looking for, for the truth. Okay, you're not going to hold a child to the same standard as you would a mature adult. And if you're a young adult, you've still got some growing to do. Okay, now looking back on some of the situations I was involved in, I wish I could undo them and handle them in another way. It's kind of like Freud's undoing when he talked about undoing. Now, ways to deal with self-forgiveness to get to that point of forgiving yourself. I kind of stick to CBT, cognitive behavior therapy techniques. So, what do? I acknowledge that I'm an imperfect human being. Okay, he makes errors, just like any human being does. But I also acknowledge my responsibility, or at least my share of the responsibility, which allows me to avoid engaging in the same behavior in the future. So if I'm going to be responsible, if I'm going to acknowledge my part, that means I'm going to actually work on not doing that behavior again. Now, as you read a lot of information about self-forgiveness, the question of making amends or reconciliation comes up. My thoughts, well, yes and no. It kind of depends. When did the event take place? Are you looking back at something that happened, years ago? Will it re-traumatize the individual if you, go back and try to actually address the incident with that individual in present time? I certainly wouldn't want to upset somebody about an event that was years ago, and presumably the person hasn't been bothered by it anymore. So there's a lot of gray area here. Instead, for my sake, if I'm talking about an incident from quite a while ago, I would maybe consider writing a letter to the individual expressing, my regret. Yeah, sticking in an envelope, but not sending it. This is about, remember, this is about self-forgiveness here, okay? But the idea of actually putting it down, actually kind of going through the action of putting that letter in an envelope, sometimes that kind of helps psychologically in terms of getting a little bit of closure on an incident. Now, if the event was recent, then it probably leans toward making amends. Getting in touch with the person that maybe that you wronged in some way, or if there's property damage, obviously you're going to take care of that depending on the scenario. Having said that, sometimes people are not amenable to your attempts at making amends or reconciliation. So you have to understand that too. And you don't necessarily need to be forgiven on their end. I mean, it helps. But if that's not going to happen, again, you're working on self-forgiveness, and you can do, what you have control over. Now, what if the incident was something that impacts yourself? What I mean is, so for example, say you're a sober individual, but you had a drink. Okay, so what do? Again, I would use, CBT techniques, maybe a stoic mentality, and acknowledge that, again, I'm an imperfect human being. I'm going to make mistakes. I accept that I'm responsible for my behavior, and I'm responsible for having that drink. Okay, I would acknowledge my feelings of guilt, because I set a standard for myself not to have a drink, but now I've had one, so okay, there's negative behavior, okay, but this does not necessarily make me a bad person, okay, so no shame here, it's more of guilt, all right, and then there's plenty of things that I do that are positive. I have to acknowledge that, okay, yeah, I did that, but let's focus on, let's get some positive psychology going on here. What are some of the other things that I've done? Say that I went a year being sober. So in other words, I've gone 365 days being sober, and then one day I had a drink. Okay, well, that's a pretty positive scenario then, 365 to 1, right? So sometimes we have to look at things in perspective, okay? Because sometimes as individuals, as people, we tend to maybe focus on the negative as opposed to the positive, right? And in times like this, maybe we need to really make sure we're taking off the blinders and looking at some of the good things that have been going on. And then I would start along my path again, in terms of sobriety. Okay. And I think, just to kind of end this video, really having a flexible mindset versus a rigid mindset is going to be real important. Just knowing that, okay, I make mistakes. They're going to happen. I'm not going to use them as excuses, but it's going to happen. I'm going to, work on taking care of those behaviors. But I know that at some point, if I fail occasionally, I'm going to, get right back up and, keep trucking, basically. And if others can forgive me, great. I can also forgive myself. So I'm hoping this video makes sense to you. I think I've covered most of it. If you've got some questions, concerns, criticisms, go ahead and put them down. Just put the criticisms down in a nice way. Okay? So see you next time. Thank you.